You're listening to the Product Coalition Podcast with Jay Stansell. This is where product mastery happens. This is where careers are made. Welcome to the Product Coalition Podcast. Let's go.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Product Coalition. My name's Jay Stansell. So SaaS has had 30 years to figure out pricing, and then AI arrived and pretty much everything got harder. We've got consumption-based models, we've got token pricing, we've got outcome-linked contracts. The way software creates and captures value has shifted fundamentally. The billing and the monetization infrastructure underneath most SaaS businesses was built for seats and subscriptions. It was never designed for this. My guest today is Griffin Parry, CEO and co-founder of Matter. Now, Griffin sold his first company, GameSparks, to Amazon back in 2017. GameSparks was a back-end platform for online game developers. And after the acquisition, Griffin stayed on at AWS for a few years, leading product and go-to-market, including heading up the EMEA business development. Then he left to build Matter. Matter provides billing infrastructure for mid-size and large software and tech companies. The gap it closes is specific and costly. CRMs and ERPs cover most of what modern SaaS business needs, but they were never equipped to handle metering, rating, and the automated data flows that usage-based pricing demands. Revenue leakage is 1% to 3% typically. So the operational billing pain is also a given, and the pricing flexibility that lets product teams ship faster and sales teams close the right deals, to be honest, stays firmly out of touch. Griffin has seen this from every angle. He's built and scaled a product company, sold it to the largest cloud provider in the world, and then watched the monetization challenge get harder as AI rewrote what software is worth and how it gets consumed. So today, we're going to dig into how AI-driven features are exposing the real limits of per-seat pricing. We'll get into the outcome-based models that we all talk about, the appeal and the practical difficulty of measuring outcomes without leaning on those proxy metrics. We'll look at where legacy billing systems, the CRMs, the ERPs, and the billing stacks become a genuine bottleneck that stops product teams from shipping. Griffin's going to share some examples of established SaaS companies that have successfully operationalized usage-based pricing at scale, and we'll close on how better visibility into pricing and usage data is changing the way product managers think about their roadmaps, their feature rollout, and experimentation with AI. Griff, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I'm really excited for today's conversation. The first question's got to be, when did you see this opportunity around the pricing change? Because we've all noticed a massive shift in the last probably 24 to 36 months, but did you see it well before then?
The story of Matter is that we experienced the pain ourselves in our first business. So you mentioned we had a business called GameSparks. It was essentially a cloud infrastructure business. So it had usage-based pricing. And which made sense. It makes sense businesses like that. We had a load of operational and go-to-market pain associated with it. Operational meaning billing was a nightmare. Go-to-market meaning we didn't have the right information about usage and billing in the right places at the right time. So we knew that there was a problem, and then we became even more convinced when we sold the company to Amazon. So we then worked at AWS, and they're one of the big pioneers in usage-based pricing. And so we got to see how they operated internally, quite really upfront, because we had to onboard GameSparks to that core metering and billing capability, which is actually pretty difficult. But we saw that AWS had the same problems that we'd had on a smaller scale at GameSparks. We also saw the mitigations that they put in place, the bespoke tooling they'd invested in a lot in to resolve it. And so that was the spark again for Matter. It's like, all right, it wasn't just us. This is a widespread problem. One of the things that we definitely didn't anticipate was the AI revolution. Like when we founded Matter back in 2020, we weren't thinking, usage-based pricing is going to be radically moved forward by AI. Like we were completely persuaded about towards usage-based pricing, but that acceleration caused by AI was a very pleasant surprise. So I can't claim to have foreseen that, but that trend towards usage was already happening.
Okay. Well, the development of AI-driven features has accompanied this usage-based pricing. I mean, that's real. I suppose the real driver for it. When everyone's sat on the fence for quite a long while around per seat versus usage-based pricing, what is it around particularly established SaaS products that you've seen them lean into when it comes to usage-based pricing, and what's made them comfortable about that move from what you've seen?
So I'll split it sort of in the period before AI and the period after it, because like I said, the trend towards usage was happening. So as you said, like SaaS pricing has traditionally been about seats or fixed recurring subscriptions. And when SaaS first arrived, that was a pretty radical innovation, right? So it really changed the way people paid for software. And seats or simple recurring subscriptions worked, but you began to see the movement towards usage for a few reasons. So, I mean, to start with, there are just some businesses that require usage pricing. So I talked about infrastructure businesses like AWS or GameSparks. You're providing resources, it costs you as the provider significantly. You need to capture the value, protect your margins by charging based on usage. So you saw quite a lot of that. And sort of similarly, other businesses like that, like communication players, like a Twilio, for example, they're charging for messages essentially, so that which costs them. So they need to charge based on usage. So there were sort of growing pockets. But then you saw there are other reasons too, is that you saw there was increased automation in the stack. So you had more and more API businesses. And when you have API businesses, machines are talking to machines. Humans aren't talking to humans, or humans talking to machines. And as soon as that happens, it sort of starts to undermine the per seat model. And then I think another factor is people saw innovators like AWS out there and saw that customers really like the better value messaging associated with usage pricing. It's like AWS would classically say, you pay by the drink or you pay for what you use. And people like that. So people sort of took inspiration and started to adopt it, thinking backwards from what their customers wanted. So that was happening. And we were talking about this trend, and we sounded a little bit like a sweaty tooth madman because it was happening, but not as quickly as we would have liked it to. And then AI happened, and AI really accelerates it. And there's a few things to think about. One, the whole cost model of AI is based on the foundational models that you need to charge, then you need to pay for on a variable basis. So if you're providing an AI feature, you will have costs yourself. So you're sort of into that way of thinking that those infrastructure companies I was talking about were in. It's like, well, you need to make sure you're covering your costs, protecting your margins. It leads you towards usage. Not necessarily. I mean, there are other ways of doing it, but it leads people towards there. There's even more of that systems talking to systems or machines talking to machines, because the AI world involves agents. Agents do things semi-autonomously. It breaks down that per seat model even more. And then the other thing to flag is that value message that I talked about before. It sort of becomes enhanced even more in an AI world, because AI supported features or products are much more orientated towards outcomes. And we're going to go on to talk about outcome-based pricing. And so people are leaning more and more into that better value messaging associated with usage or outcome-based pricing. So it's the AI revolutions has just added impetus to something that was already happening, but it really has juiced it. Makes my life much easier.
So before we do move on to outcome-based pricing, I want to pick your brain, not only as a business leader yourself who would have had to have made this decision, but from what you've seen across all of your clients and customers. And that is, when does pricing stop becoming a commercial decision, and when does it become a product decision? Is that, when I think about an early startup, you got a 3-person team, it's going to be the founder or the the sales leader in that size business unit is making that pricing decision. But then when you get into some of the big companies like at AWS, where's the pricing being decided? Is it at the product level, where monetization architecture is part of the product manager's responsibility, or does it separate out into a commercial space that lives on its own?
Well, I think this is one of the big problems with pricing generally. It doesn't have a clear owner.
Right.
So, is it product's decision? Well, yeah, product definitely have something to say about it, but is it a sales decision? Or is it a marketing decision? Or is it a finance decision? Or is it a sort of an operations and billing decision? And is there an engineering decision? Because obviously you need to build the stack and the infrastructure to allow you to price the way you want. So where I ended up is everybody needs to be in the decision. In the early days of a startup, it's easy to have that collaboration because often one person is playing multiple roles, so they just talk to themselves about it. But as companies grow, you essentially need to have a committee, and you need to set that committee up to work effectively and collaborate effectively. And often that doesn't happen, and that's one of the reasons why people use price as a lever far less than they should. It's just that they can't organize themselves internally, and sort of inertia kicks in. It's like you have pricing, it works well enough, your business is doing okay, it's too difficult to organize yourself to make any changes. Loss aversion kicks in because change involves risk, and you don't feel like you're well to assess or manage or mitigate that risk, so people end up doing nothing, and that's a big opportunity missed. It's tricky.
I remember being taught many years ago that changing the price is the lowest effort way of increasing revenue, but it's also the highest risk way of increasing revenue.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, but I think I know exactly what you're talking about. But I think often when people say that, they're talking quite simplistically about pricing. They're just saying, raise the level. You'll be surprised how much people will absorb. And it's, that's a classic private equity trick. You buy a business, you raise the prices, and you've increased the value of the business. But what I'm much more interested in the design of pricing. It's like, it's not just your existing model and raise the level. It's how are people using your product? How are they extracting value from the product? How can you change the way your pricing works to improve your value proposition to customers, get them to lean into your product, use it more, become more dependent on it? So yeah, the way you're describing there, I think that's quite simplistic. I think pricing is a fantastic lever, but it's quite a sophisticated one.
Well, you touched on many points there relating to outcome-based pricing. So what are the practical difficulties of defining and measuring those outcomes that lead to that lead to the ability to achieve that? And how do we get past proxy metrics, or how do we use proxy metrics to define those outcome-based prices?
So attribution is the problem. Generally, I'm quite skeptical about outcome-based pricing, but I need to give you a slightly nuanced answer. So listen, from Meta's point of view, we don't care, because there's a spectrum which goes from pure usage pricing to poor consumption-based pricing. Any place along that spectrum has the problem that we solve for it, which is essentially you need to count something and apply a price in order to work out how much to charge someone. So I don't really have any skin in the game. I'm happy with it with wherever anybody is on that spectrum. But what I notice is the attribution problem. So taking one end of the spectrum, if you take usage, so again, I'll use AWS as the example again. You're paying AWS to use a resource. There's no link between your usage of the resource and the value you get from it. AWS is just charging you to use a computer. There's really no link to value. All the way at the other end of the spectrum, you've got something like payments, where you charge £10, the payment company is going to take 2.5%. That's a very direct outcome-based reward to the payment provider. Everybody's happy to accept that. It's all good. But I think people think that there's more scope to do the payments type model than there is in practice, and attribution is the issue. What I mean by attribution is that pricing is an exchange of value between the vendor and the customer, and it needs to be perceived as fair and straightforward by both parties. And the problem with attribution is disagreement over the impact to value created by the vendor. So, which is why people end up using proxies, which is sort of spaces in the middle. So, to give a worked example, loads of great companies that handle calls without involving human call centers agents. Now, extreme outcome-based pricing would say, listen, the call has resulted in a sale or has avoided retention, a retention problem. So the vendor should get a proportion of that benefit to the customer. But it's impossible to isolate the impact so what people end up doing is using proxies. They go, okay, well, we're happy to pay on the number of calls that are handled. Which sort of, you're paying based on a valuable action. It's a valuable action. Like the computer has taken the call rather than a human. That'll help save costs. And then often people can find even better things where there's a better value proxy, which might be the number of calls which are resolved without escalation by human. Because then it's not just calls taken, it's calls resolved without a human, which would be a failure. But they're not pure they look like outcome, but they're not pure outcomes. They're based on proxies. And I just think that's the way the world works. It's complicated. It's rare that you'll find a place where you can do pure outcome. I think that's fine. Just use a decent value proxy. It works well for the vendor and their customer.
Nice advice. Talking about some big environments, contact centers, let's go back to the old world. There's plenty of CRM, ERP, billing systems that in companies I've worked in the last 20 years are possibly 20 years old themselves. They're obviously a bottleneck, particularly at the large end of business. So for the product teams that are looking at this new world of opportunity when it comes to pricing and those transactions, what is it around the new opportunity that makes the case so worthwhile for the CFO to be leaning into change?
Yeah. Okay. This is a really good question. And by the way, I like full disclosure. This is exactly the problem that we solve for our customers. So, like you said at the top, like we particularly focus on like big and successful customers. They've got revenues, they've got customers, they've got an established what I call monetization stack, which includes the CRM and the ERP, and they've invested a lot in getting those tooling in place. The problem is that tooling anticipated the old world pricing, more simple subscription and recurring feature-based pricing. So their problem is that the world is moving towards more usage pricing, like their business models are changing and they have to react to what's happening around them. And the tooling that they have doesn't work. And Meter is the easy button. Like those tools have most of what you need, but there are things missing. So there's the usage data processing, which metering. There's the advanced rating, so applying complex usage-based pricing rules to that usage data. There's an integration layer that's required, so you're automating data flows that go around the stack because workflows go into and out of those systems. So that's what Meter does. But to answer your question, it's one of those, it's sort of linked to what you talked about before about people not using pricing as a lever enough and inertia kicking in. I think about it as a frog in boiling water problem, is that things are working okay. There are lots of problems with it, but none of them are in the sort of the top 5 that need to be dealt with on a particular day. For example, billing is a nightmare, and anybody who is working on the billing team hates their life for a week or two at the beginning of the month. For example, billing takes 10 days. It takes 10 days to get invoices out at the end of the month when it should really take a day. And so there's a little impact on that. There is frustration because it's very difficult to change prices. People just about accept it. There's probably revenue leakage for various reasons. You're not capturing, if you're trying to charge on usage, you're not capturing all usage, or you're using old-fashioned pricing. But they're all paper-cut issues. So in aggregate, they're a really big deal. There's probably a massive opportunity cost, but the pain is quite distributed. People are feeling it in different places, and people are just about getting by. And on top of all that, there is a lot of fear of change, because these quote-to-cash stacks, these monetization stacks, they're complex, and making changes to them involves a really significant transformation project. And if you get it wrong, it's a major problem, because it hits your revenue line. So that's why it's a frog in boiling water problem. What shocks people into action are things like, oh, I need to change my pricing, or I need to prepare for a big funding event or for an IPO, and I'm going to be going through a quality of earnings audit, and they're going to point out that my control environment is weak. You might have a really bad audit, to use audit again, and the auditors are saying, look, we had to spend times as much time on this as we thought, and the audit report is really negative about your control systems, and that becomes an issue at the board. Another trick, M&A. You buy a company and you're like, oh, how do we bring this new acquisition onto our systems that aren't really even capable for our own stuff, let alone what we've acquired? So that tends to happen in businesses like ours. You're either waiting for people to sort of understand what the future is bringing to them, they step towards the problem, or you're waiting for them to react to a nasty shock, which suddenly brings into focus the fact that they've got a big problem that they've been ignoring, but they need to address. So it's a frog in boiling water thing.
What would be your advice, Griff, if you, in that scenario, you're in company X and all of that, which is very common, is all going on, and is due to the point we was talking about earlier, no one wants to take the first step on changing price. But everyone can see or hear, maybe we should change our approach to monetization. You're a senior product manager. You're bumping into the CFO next week for half hour catch up on life, and you want to be the one to make this change. What advice would you give to that person on how do you craft the case to start this conversation of change around price or pricing?
How long have I got with this person? Half an hour?
Go for it. Yeah.
The temptation. I used to be a product person, by the way, so I think I find it quite easy to inhabit. The easy thing to do is to talk about it from your point of view and say, hey, I really want to be able to change pricing because I want to launch new products more quickly, or I want to change pricing so the value proposition is improved in the market. So, you'd be saying that you're talking to a CFO who are thinking about risk containment. And I think in those circumstances, you're better off talking about it from that person's point of view, starting there, because then you'll establish a good rapport, and then you introduce all the upside benefits to you. So you start by talking about operational pain in billing. You start by talking about leakage. I love talking about revenue leakage. I mean, you said 1% to 3% at the beginning, and I know why you use that. It's because that's what we've used. It's actually higher than that. Like PwC, we're about to publish a report with PwC, and they're quite happy to say revenue leakage is typically 4 to 7%. That's 4 to 7%. And by revenue leakage, I mean this is stuff that you're contractually able to bill for, that never gets onto the invoice because you're not capturing all the usage that would drive the amounts, or using out-of-date pricing. So you tell that to a CFO, and you could drop another X number of percentage points straight to the bottom line. You'll get their attention. And you acknowledge that this will be a big and scary transformation that would involve significant risk to them in their career. Like, if you get a quote-to-cash transformation, that's a career ender if you're a CFO. But so they know that you understand the pressures that they're under, and then you tell them about all the upsides. We'll be able to ship product faster. Sales will be able to do custom deals that win. We'll be able to improve the value proposition which make marketing happy. So that would be that.
Nice.
Address their fear, then talk about the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I'm keen to move on to the new world around how some of your SaaS clients have successfully operationalized usage-based pricing. But before we get there, I want to be a bit cheeky, Griff. I want to know, how did Meta determine Meta's pricing? What has this process been like for you in the last few years, and where have you ended up?
You won't be surprised that we have a usage-based pricing model. I mean, it's very difficult if I'm saying, hey, you want to move, you should be moving this pricing before I don't do it myself. But we're quite a good example of the way people adapt usage-based pricing in enterprise environments. So our model is not pure usage. Essentially, we charge, the easiest way to think about it is it's a platform fee. So a recurring monthly platform fee, which includes a generous allowance of usage. And for us, usage is measurements in bill calculation, integration operations across the stack. And the reason and so what happens is most of our customers know exactly what they're going to pay each month. And if they exceed their allowance, they'll pay overages. But at that point, we'll almost certainly renegotiate with them to change the product fee, lift it up a little bit and give them more allowances. And the reason that happens, that's hybrid pricing. I would call it hybrid pricing. So it's a mix of that fixed recurring pricing with usage pricing. And the reason our pricing ends up like that is that we sell big enterprises, and big enterprises want predictability. They don't want sort of a taxi meter going where there's a wide range of outcomes at the end of the month. So that's why our pricing works like that. And it's very common that our customers are doing the same thing, because they're also selling to people who value predictability. And that's one thing I'd always say, like, you rarely, particularly in enterprise context, you rarely see extreme form use pricing. It's almost always hybrid, so you can introduce that predictability. And that's true of AWS, that's true of Snowflake, that's anybody doing it at scale. So that's where we ended up. I mean, one thing's worth saying is I'm not a pricing strategist, but I work with really good pricing strategists all the time. So we weren't short of really expert help and guidance about what our pricing should be. So I'm pretty confident in our model, just because a lot of really smart people have had their eyes over it.
Nice. On that note then, when is the Goldilocks moment for a business to go and invest in a pricing strategist?
Oh, that's an interesting... It's linked back to the question we were talking about before about pricing committees. So one of the big things to look out for is you have really smart pricing strategists who feel powerless in organizations, because if you don't have that commitment and that coordination so that multiple functions are working together about pricing, it's really difficult for that pricing strategist to have an impact. Who do they talk to? Who do they persuade? Like, who's got their back? So, I mean, the sort of trite answer to your question is, don't do it until you've got that coordination and collaboration framework in place. The other trite argument is you should always be thinking about pricing from the very beginning of a company. And when you're one person, then you just need to put sort of ring fence part of your brain to think about pricing every now and again. And at some point when you're, I don't know, 70, 80, 90 people big, maybe at that point you assign pricing to an individual. But even before you create that individual, you need to have a single thread. You need to have an owner for pricing who cares about it, but you need them to operate in a collaborative way so they're coordinating all those various functions. It's complicated.
Nice, thank you. I appreciate your perspective. So we mentioned maybe sharing some more stories around some of your clients that have successfully made some changes around pricing. I'm really keen to know, how does Meta allow them to compete more effectively with AI native solutions?
I mean, just to give you an example of some customers, I talked about AWS a lot. So a lot of our customers are infrastructure players who price similarly to AWS. So ClickHouse are a good example. They're an early customer. They're one of the biggest, fastest growing database companies in the world. Matillion are a big ETL provider. They're another one of our customers. Sneak, which is more about cloud security. So in terms of what we bring to them, it goes back to what are the benefits of solving this problem? And there are some sort of boring workaday ones, like you eliminate leakage and you make billing operations much better. But the ones that I get really excited about, the agility points, is that you can change much more quickly. I mean, so if you're going to talk to ClickHouse, for example, that's the thing that they would flag straight away. They go, Meter allowed us to move much faster. Like you can react, they are reacting to what's around them. They are always evolving their own business model. Companies that don't do this well find is that they have pricing that works, but any kind of change is incredibly painful and slow. That's not the case with our customers. They can change pricing really quickly. So that's what I really like. And also you ship product faster, but you also enable sales to do the right deals, and you enable pricing committee or marketing who's got responsible for pricing to design pricing to resonate with the market. So yeah, that's what we do. That's what makes it good.
Can I ask, Griff, what are some successful ways, and I suppose what are some first principles that you could get wrong when it comes to experimenting with pricing change?
Ooh. Because I'm very focused on usage pricing, I always see everything through that lens. So I'm probably going to give a slightly different answer than someone else who doesn't think usage first. I'll come at it like this. Actually, let me illustrate this with this. So when I worked in product, I worked in TV, and then I worked in the newspaper business in the UK. So I worked for News International that owned the Times and the Sun, etc. National, and it was just the moment in the late noughties and early teens where people were moving newspapers online, and I remember being really surprised that no one knew how much people were reading any particular article. So they had a newspaper feed where they created a newspaper every day and they distributed it, and they didn't really know what people did with it, and that was fine because papers have existed for hundreds of years, and so there really wasn't much impetus to innovate around the product. But I come from a digital world where I really need to know, like, what articles are people reading, and what changes can you make to make them read more and read less. So if you're in a usage world and you're recording usage, and that's sort of part of the common currency that everybody in your organization uses, so not just product people, but finance people, engineering people, marketing people, you name it, I think you're immediately in a much better position when it comes to pricing, because you have quite an intimate understanding of how people interact with your product. So, I mean, I often have the conversation with people. It's like, if you're not sure about pricing, start by just recording the usage and seeing what people do, because that will enable you to start speculating and experimenting with potential ideas. Again, this is sort of simplistic answer, but starting with the usage is a very sensible thing to do if you're in a usage pricing world.
Okay. On a similar note, Griff, you've got a global perspective here. You've worked a lot with North America. You're here in Europe. Between the different markets of Europe, North America, India, Asia, etc., when it comes to this migration from seats to usage base, or in any of the other directions that are available now, which markets are you seeing which trends happen? Who's making some big moves? Who's sticking to the old ways? Or is everyone just moving at the same pace, making some transitions and working through
it? This is totally anecdotal. I think everyone's in the same direction.
Right.
I think the States move faster. Just more, they're less conservative. They're more alive to innovation. They'll be quicker to see what's working and imitate it. They'll be just slightly keener to take advantage of new tools or new approaches. It's very broad brush. It's not like there aren't brilliantly innovative companies that we work with in Europe. Like one of our early customers was on Fido, and if you get verified your identity when you're ordering a new passport or something, you probably would have used their technology. They were really smart and really progressive about the way they thought about pricing and the whole stack. But generally, I see more innovation coming out of the US.
Understood. And then I've got the same question regarding B2C and B2B. What trends and directions are those two worlds going on?
I live very much in a B2B world. That is who I'm supplying. Clearly, you're seeing expectation about how technology works and how pricing works from the B2C world leaching into the B2B world. I mean, a classic example, which is directly relevant to us, is our customers really need to expose usage and billing data in a very digestible way to their customers and individual users at their customer. There's an expectation that I just go in and I can see a billing dashboard which tells me exactly how much I've used and what the running total of my bill at any given moment whenever I'm interested in it. So that is kind of consumerization of B2B tech. There is that expectation. I'm used to using apps on my phone. Why can't I do it when I'm looking at how much I'm spending and using your product? So yeah, that strong theme.
On that note, then, humor me for a minute here. Netflix made a big change in the B2C world. We used to all pay per video at Blockbuster. Then it was get 4 DVDs a month for 10 quid or whatever it was. And then we got unlimited videos online for £15 a month. Do you ever see B2C going all the way back to the start where you start paying per Netflix episode or per movie?
So this is really my world as of about 15 years ago. So I said I worked in TV. I worked at Sky in the UK, and the main thing I focused on was on TV. And this was right in the early days, and people were working out what was going on. So this is something that we could drink several pints talking about. I don't think it will go back like that. Consumers like predictability too. And for a household item like that, but again, I would flag that I'm sure you've bought movies on Amazon Prime or equivalent in the recent past. So it's a hybrid. Is that people are quite happy with subscriptions that give them access to a lot, but every now and again they'll buy on a piece rate basis too. But I think that's what I expect. What we've currently got is probably what's going to carry on. It's mostly subscription with a little bit of pay-per-view, as I would have described it 15 years ago, around the edges. Nice.
I appreciate your perspective, Griff. It's been a fantastic episode. I love money stories and talking about money alongside the world of product. So I really appreciate your perspectives, your wisdom, and also so much around what's been going on in the background there at Meter to get to where you are today. So thank you so much for sharing time with me, Griff.
Cool. Thanks very much for having me on. I love talking about TV, by the way, and you gave me an opportunity.
Fantastic. To everyone listening in, thank you also for sharing some of your time with Griff and I today on the Product Coalition podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Product Coalition, head over to productcoalition.com. Until next time, thank you very much.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Product Coalition podcast, hosted by Jay Stansell. Got questions or want to explore more topics? Connect with Jay on LinkedIn or join the ever-growing Product Coalition community on Substack. Thanks for listening.